I just don't recognize the initials at first. Jump up, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
Oh, okay. Hey, Dr. Moreland. I had a question from somebody the other day. They said if the Bible's inerrant, why didn't God preserve the inerrancy through copying and translation? I don't really know how to answer that, so I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll just call you IBL. I don't know your name. Well, look, at some point, God rescinded overseeing the process with such tight controls in order for humans to exercise choice. I mean, suppose that God had done what this questioner is asking. Well, then you would have people teaching from the inerrant autographs, but they would be interpreting it differently. So what good would it do them? Well, then you can say, well, then why wouldn't God make sure everybody interpreted it appropriately? Well, then people would apply it inappropriately. The point is, at some point, God had to choose to allow human beings and their finitude and frailties to enter into the process, and the place that he chose to do that was in the transcription of the text, and it hasn't done us any harm. I mean, if you take a look at what we have what we need to have the very voice of God in the very words of Scripture. By the way, we do have the original text, and we don't have the original codex or codices. If I say the word red, red, blue, how many words have I said? Well, I've said 2 word types and 3 word tokens. A word type is repeatable. There's been one type, the word red, which I said twice, so I had 2 tokens of that. And then the word type blue and 1 token. Now, if you write "Every Good Boy Does Fine" on a piece of paper and somebody else copies "Every Good Boy Does Fine" and they tear up the first piece and burn it, do I have the original? And the answer is yes. I have the original text type, even though I don't have the original tokens. I don't have the original scribblings. But that doesn't matter because it's the type that carries meaning, not the tokens. When we talk about the original codices or the original tokens of the Apostle Paul and so forth, we would have to talk about his hand style, the size of the font, what color ink he wrote in, and that's meaningless. It is the text as a type that carries meaning, and it's repeatable. And when textual critics have done their job, what they give us is actually the autographic text. Now you might say, well, why did God allow the original codices to disappear? And the answer is that we would have less confidence that we have the autographic text if the originals had stayed around than we do that God let it disappear. Let me illustrate. Suppose the standard meter was identified with a particular iron rod in a specific science lab in Paris, France. You think that would be a good thing? I don't, because we would have to have 24/7 guards. Some guard could even lie and say in the middle of the night somebody stole the bar and put another one in there, and then we would forever have the length of a meter lost. Instead, what we have is the standard meter is diffused in hundreds of laboratories around the world, and it's produced by a certain procedure. Well, if we had the original scribblings of the apostles, in order for us to prove a skeptic that we've got it, we would have to be able to prove that we've had guards on those documents 24/7 for 2,000 years. All the skeptic would have to do would be to say, how do you know somebody in the 4th century didn't come along and take it and put another one in there? Or erase part of it and put something else? Why, we would have absolutely no answer to that. But God diffused the original codices, or the original text type, through thousands of manuscripts. And so there's no doubt that we have the originals because we have thousands of manuscripts that bear witness to it. So we're in better epistemological grounds for God not allowing the originals to be preserved than we would be if he had allowed them to say exist in some monastery over in Italy. The price that was paid for that was that there is some human error in the process, but it's minuscule. So that's my quick.
Very good. Thank you very much. A couple more questions here we have time for. One from the text and then one from the voice. Got a question here from Nathan. Nathan asks, he says, I understand that we need not forget the power of the Spirit and probably underestimate it in our Western culture. And don't for one second venture to say that God can't do that. But how do you decipher the Disneyland type of instances to keep from slipping down the slippery slope of emotions, experience, and becoming too much of an influence on your theology?
Well, I think you balance it with the other side of the triangle. That concern that Nathan's surfaced would be the concern I would have for people in kind of Pentecostal charismatic churches that are kind of too far over there. The concern I would have for people who have my training and my tradition and come from a background like me is that I tend to live too much in my head, and I overanalyze things such that if God wanted to speak to me in a certain way, even if he yelled at me, I wouldn't be willing to discern it because I'd parse it 50,000 times. And so my concern, I think what a person, my advice would be tailored to the person in question. If it was a person that was overly balanced, like in Kingdom Triangle, I give advice to Pentecostals and Charismatics who are too anti-intellectual. A person like Nathan, I would say, that you should probably let go of that question because it's not an unimportant question, but I suspect you probably use it as a form of control. God's big enough to take care of you if you make some mistakes. And so I would say read something like Dallas Willard's book, Hearing God. Start practicing it. Open your heart and mind, and be willing to make mistakes in learning to discern the voice of God. And then, as you learn to discern that voice, it will become clear to you as time goes on what it is. I'll give you an example. 3 summers ago, I was walking back. I was in the midst of a very hard time, and I was walking back, and I said, "Lord, I'd love to." From jogging, I was walking home, and I said, "Lord, I'd love to hear your voice more clearly." And the thought came to me, well, why don't you ask me to do something for you today? And it had a very distinctive tone. And I said, Lord, I don't know if this is you or not. I think it is. But I said, if it's you, I don't know what to ask. And it came to me, ask me for $5,000 before the day is over with. And I said, Lord, if this is really you, it would mean an unbelievable blessing to my family if you would grant this to us, because we're in such need right now. I was 70-30, it was God's voice. It felt like it was coming outside of me. It was in a tone that isn't the way I talk to myself. To make a long story short, out of absolutely nowhere at 5:20 that evening, I was contacted by a person who had $5,200 they wanted to give me out of nowhere. It was unbelievable. Now, I went back and visited that experience and paid careful attention to what the voice sounded like to me and what it was like. So, fast forward 6 months later, I've preached in a church. I'm over at the side. There are people who've come forward to receive prayer. I've never been in this church. There are about 20, 25 people up front. And I'm sitting there saying, Lord, I'm here. I'm available. I'm here. I'm just here. Be with me. My eyes kept being drawn on a young man, and I looked at him 2 or 3 times, and something came to me. Tell him that there has been a passion in his heart that has been driving him for years, but he has been stuffing it and hasn't been wanting to act on it because he's been afraid. And now is the time for him to act on this. Well, that came to me with the same tone as that other occasion came to me. And so I went to this young man and said, may I pray for you? And I laid hands on him and I said, this could be wrong, but I seem to be hearing. And I told him this. He stops me, and tears start coming out of his eyes. And he said, Dr. Moreland, you don't know me. I went to Dallas Seminary. At this point, I don't believe in these sorts of things, but I knew you were speaking at this church. And he said, how in God's name did you know that? And I said, well, I wasn't 100% sure, but I was pretty confident because I've learned to discern that tone. And he said, that is exactly the thing that has been driving me crazy for the last several weeks. It's been on my mind for a long time. Could I call you and talk to you about it? I said, sure. So I learned to discern God's voice by learning to pay attention to it and by being willing to step out and to see if the Lord does things. And you learn to discern through practice like you learn to discern anybody's voice. It's the same way you learn to do exegesis. You learn it by practicing. So my advice to Nathan, and then I'll close here, is that you should probably loosen up a bit, whereas someone on the other side should probably be more careful. I'm learning to try to find my own balance on this, and I think we all have to do that as best we can.
Well, Dr. Moreland and everybody else, I'm very sorry to say I have the time at 10:32, 2 minutes over. I know that a lot of you have had your hands up for quite some time, but we've got to respect the time of Dr. Moreland, and he has been with us for an hour and a half now, and we're just so appreciative, Dr. Moreland, everybody here. I think you've done a wonderful job. I think you have made your points and given us a whole lot to think about and a whole lot to ponder and